All right. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of our live stream that we have here. So this is actually the painting that we completed over the past two live streams. So I just kind of wanted to show you what the finished product of was for that, because I know that we didn't quite finish it at the end of the second one. So I did in a couple of little grassy details up top, a little bit of a rocky effect down here, a couple of just additional things that kind of just overall cleaned it up a little bit. But yeah, I figured I'd show you guys that, just if you guys were interested. And today what we're going to be doing is a different kind of painting. This is actually a commission painting. So somebody reached out to me through my website, and they said, hey, we've just cut our cords, so to speak. We've gotten rid of our landline, we went over to cell phones, and now we have a phone jack in them all. So we're looking for something to cover it. So would you be willing to do a painting for that? And I thought, that's a really cool way to do that. Just a nice little painting to hang right over the old phone jack that's not really doing anything anymore. So they had a couple of specific requests. They requested that it was 11 by 14. So we're going to be doing something that's 11 by 14, obviously. This is a newer canvas that I picked up. That's a type that I haven't used before, and I feel that the just from touching it, I can tell that the canvas itself is a little bit more springy. So I'm kind of curious to see how that'll sort of interact with the paint. Be interesting to see. It's a little bit of a different size, a little bit smaller. And one thing that they also requested was that I paint the edges of the painting. So they're looking to hang it without a frame in the spot where they're looking to put it. So I'll be making sure to do that. They said that they wanted a nature scene, which is perfect because I do a lot of those, so that's good. And they also requested that it be kind of like blue, green, and brown, mostly a lot of those tones in there. And the reason for that is because the room that it's going in is kind of like the dining room area, and there's light blue walls with a little bit of brown accents in there. So I figured, hey, let's throw something together and we'll do this. So I'll pop this up on there. Got my palette over here. I know that it's still a little bit early in the broadcast, so I'm waiting for a couple of people to get in. And in the meantime, if you guys do have any questions or anything, or you want to chat or ask me, what color paint that I'm using or what kind of brush, or even if you just want to say hi, feel free to throw it up in the chat. I can't guarantee that I'll see everything, and if I look over this way quite a bit, it's because that's where my monitor is, so that I can actually see what the camera can see. But yeah, I'll be trying to take a look at that and answer any questions that come across as well. And I'll kind of try to explain some of my thought process as I'm going along, just to kind of get it out of my head, basically, and let you know as I'm doing this what kind of things that I'm thinking about. So what I'm doing off on the all right. So I think that we've gotten the video feedback, so my apologies for that. I thought I'd taken care of a lot of the technical difficulties that we'd seen, but maybe not. But what I've done here is off on the side here, I've gone into a little bit of just clean water. And basically what I'm doing there is I'm going to thin down the paint that I'm about to use. So I'm going to go into a little bit of light blue paint. So I don't know if you can see the palette there, but it's a thinner paint. This is all acrylics that I'm working with, and it's a bit of light blue. And I'm going to go into white so that I even dull it down a little bit further and push it more towards the white. So when I'm thinking about sort of the composition of what's going to be going on here, I'm thinking of a place that's like really deep in the woods. So something that's very woodsy and kind of feels like it's back there a ways in the trees. So I'm going to go in there. And I've gotten this, I don't know if this is coming across very well, but this is actually quite white, even compared to the light blue that we were using just as a starter. And I've thinned it down with a little bit of water. And basically what that's going to do is it's going to allow it to go on even lighter than it would normally. The paint itself is thinner and it's flowing a little bit more on the canvas. So I'm going to go just all the way across the top on that. Making sure to try to get this as even as possible. So this is going to be quite light across the top. And what I'll actually do with that is I will pull it down as well. So it's coming down. And I'm not super concerned about exactly what shape this is taking. I just want it to basically be a very light coat, come down in a couple spots so that you can actually see a little bit of the blue poking through. But I actually want quite a bit of white at this point. And you'll see kind of how things are going to come together as we go. A little bit more over here. And I'm just going to flip up my little foot here so that I can quick dab around the edges as well. A little bit more blue. And I'll dip into that clean water once again to thin it down a little bit. And I will just go across the edges up here, making sure that those are covered so that this person who commissioned me, when they do hang it on the wall, there'll be nice coverage along the edges, so it won't just be, all covered and then there'll be these awkward white spots on the edges. Nothing super fancy here. Right now I'm using a flat brush. This is just something that you get in any craft setup or anything like that. So nothing major. I'm not using super advanced techniques or materials or anything. I tend not to when I paint, honestly. So now that that's on the canvas, you can tell that it's still very wet because even as I run it over with the brush, you can start to see it sort of moving around a bit and shifting on the canvas. So what I'm going to do now actually is I'm going to start putting in some of my effects to make it look like I'm far back in the tree line. And the way that I'm going to do that is going into a little bit of this light blue, but I have some just straight black that's on my canvas as well. So I'm going to mix that in with the blue, and I'm going to get sort of a dark brownish, bluish, sort of hazy color almost. And I'm actually going to go over to my paper towel that I have over here, and I'm going to take some of the paint out of the brush because I want this to be pretty dry. I don't want to be going in with tons of paint at this point. And the reason why is because I want to create some effects back here that look like, I don't know, some dark shapes that are maybe covering in spots. And I'm sticking mostly vertical here. Maybe a little bit more. And the reason that I'm doing this is because I want these to give the impression of being very far away trees. That as you're looking through it, you can see through some of the forest canopy, but you can't see all the way through. So what you're seeing is sort of light in spots and some sky, but you're also seeing quite a bit of the effect that you get when you're kind of looking through a treetop. So you're not seeing the full sky, you're kind of seeing it, just dump that down a bit, seeing it through some spots, basically. My brush right now is a little bit wet, so I'm going to actually take off some of this canvas, or off the paint off the canvas. Acrylic dries very, very fast, so if you're going to make a modification like that, you have to get in there and get after it pretty quickly, actually. If you don't, you're not really going to be able to pull it off, just because of how fast it dries. I'm going to take a little bit more off here. Later, what I'm going to do is on the bottom part of the painting, I'm going to have a little bit of water down there. So I'm going to put a little bit of blue down, which I'll be using later on in the painting. But I can do some prep work with the colors that I already have on my canvas. That way I don't waste any paint or anything like that, and the whole process goes a little bit quicker. I'm going to take the paint that's on the canvas now, and I'm going to drag it across, basically just so that I don't really waste any paint that's already there. And as long as I'm thinking about it, I'm going to move this foot back down so that my canvas isn't sliding from side to side as I'm doing this. And again, these are just far away trees at this point, so I'm not concerned at all with any details or anything like that. I just basically want this to be far away, dim shapes that would suggest that maybe there's something that's blocking the light back there. Some things that we can't quite see through. Pardon me for stepping in front of the painting again. Just going to put a little bit more in here and a little bit more in here. And maybe a little bit more over here. And I think that that's going to about do it for this, this sort of row, this layer of the painting, I guess. All right. So we've kind of got our faraway trees that we're kind of as if we're almost looking out into the canopy, and we're seeing a couple of spots where the light's being blocked by faraway trees back there. Now what do we want to do? So in general, when I'm working on a painting, I'm thinking about moving from furthest away to closest to me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to add in another plane of things that are a little bit closer to me, hills, trees, that kind of thing. That's really what I'm thinking about at this point. So in order to accomplish that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in just a line that's much darker than what's currently on the canvas. This is kind of a grayish, bluish brown sort of color that's very faded. And in order to bring something a little bit closer to me, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have that color be a little bit more saturated. So there's a little bit more color behind it rather than it being more of just this sort of grayish blue-brown color. The way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to step over here and grab a little bit of brown paint. And people always ask, when it comes to art type stuff, what kind of pen are you using, what pencil, what paint? This is just Anita's all-purpose acrylic craft paint. So there's, again, nothing super fancy here. I found that I do my best work when I have a variety of things to kind of test and play around in, and this is a paint that I'm a little bit more familiar with. So I found that it works for me. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of that brown paint. I'm going to go into the light blue that we had before, and I'm going to get us a color that's a little bit more vibrant than what we're doing, but it's still, we're not quite in the foreground yet, so I don't want this to be lighting people's eyes on fire yet. I'm really not sure how well lighting in here is going to pick this up, but it's still kind of faded, but it's got much more brown in it, so it's got a much more substantial look to it, rather than this stuff that seems like it's very almost ghostly and far away. So I'm going to dab a little bit of that paint off of the brush. I'm still using the same brush. I have a tendency to do that when I paint. I just kind of go along doing my own thing with the brush. And I try to go from light to dark because you get the best results that way. But I just have a tendency to not clean off the brush, and I really only change brushes when I feel like I have to. less brush cleaning that way. So at this point, what I'm doing is I'm just laying in another layer that's a little bit closer to us. And I'm going to pull down to try to fade it out even more. And that's something too that as we're coming towards us, I'm going to want to leave a little bit of area that's a little bit more faded in between the pieces of land, in between the planes of the painting, because that's going to kind of contribute to that feeling of depth. It's going to look like there's maybe a little bit of mist in between this this layer and then the next layer closer to us, which it really helps to sell the illusion. Because I mean, really, when you boil it down, painting and drawing and all such as that, they're really kind of very limited way of being an optical illusion almost, because it's all two-dimensional. Everything that we're doing is all occurring in a two-dimensional plane, so we're just basically trying to make it appear as if we have something that's got a lot of depth to it, and that there are multiple different things going on. Basically making it look like we're seeing in 3D. When in actuality, we're not. All right. So that brown layer goes down. And what we're going to want to do at this point is put in some grassy areas and some trees and all such as that. So that we can kind of, again, just have some pieces in the painting and separate this layer, kind of give it some things that are happening on it, as opposed to this layer that's way further back. And what I'm going to do is I think I'm going to have some trees that are alive and some trees that are dead. So you're going to have like trees that are more full-bodied as well as trees that are more, you just kind of see trunks and branches sticking off in different directions. Because if you go out into a forest, not every tree is, you know, fully in bloom, fully alive and everything. So you get a couple of dead trees here and there. And I think that having that really does help to kind of sell that illusion a little bit again. So what I will do is I'm probably, just use this same brush. I'm going to go into some green, and I'll take a little bit of the brown as well. We're going to be making a greenish brown. And that'll be sort of a base coat for our grassy areas. And basically when I'm talking about a base coat, what I'm saying is sort of a lower level of color. So it's not necessarily the color that I want to stand out the most. It's not like a highlight color. But what I'm looking for there is something that's kind of going to be, it's just going to serve as a base. I can tell that I'm going to need to add in a little bit more green because I hope that the lighting is okay. But what you can see is that the green is kind of being eaten by the brown that's already on the canvas. So I'm going to add in a little bit more of that. That's a little bit better. There we go. And like I said, I don't want this to be, you know, face meltingly green at this point, because this is sort of the underlayer of the grass. When you look at a grassy hill, a lot of what you're seeing is sort of the stuff that is underneath. You see a couple of highlights with the blades that are sticking up that are really captured by the light of the sun. You see those really glint and sparkle in the sunlight. But a lot of what you're seeing is sort of the undergrowth. You're seeing things that aren't necessarily in the light. They're kind of shadowy. So I want to make sure that I get that color in my base coat here. Do a quick check on time. Okay, I do plan to go until about 7:45, maybe a little bit later tonight. So I might have to leave this one sort of in the middle, and who knows, maybe we can come back to it. Right now I'm grabbing a little bit of yellow paint to put on my palette, because that's the way that I'm going to make this green really sparkle and add in the highlight color. So it's at this point that I'm going to drop this brush at this point, because at this point when I'm trying to add a highlight color, what I need is something that's going to pick up that light. And there's already a lot of browns, greens, and the dark colors that we were using before. And you're really not going to be able to see that color come through very clearly. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to switch to a fan brush. So this isn't a very wide fan. Let's see if the autofocus can catch up to that. But basically it's just bristles that are fanned out more in a line, and that just basically helps you to do a couple of different little effects with that. And it's very good for capturing things like blades of grass, for example, which is what I'm going to be using it for here. So I'm going to be basically just dabbing this on. And I don't want this to kind of overwhelm the base coat that's underneath it. I don't want this to be super bright. You can kind of see me scrubbing it in a little bit. Basically, I'm just sort of sculpting and picking out the pieces that I want to really be bright and to have that highlight on there. And I'm just sort of scrubbing that lighter color in. Grab a little bit more, mix up a little bit more of this highlight color. Looking at it's a little bit too bright, so I'm going to add in a little bit more green. It's kind of a balancing act when you're mixing paint. Really, you don't want it to be too bright, because if you do that, your dark colors get swallowed up, kind of. And one of the main things that I found with art, visual art that you want to do is contrast. You want it to be areas of darkness next to areas of light. Because if everything is super bright, like if I never went any darker, this stuff is all pretty light back here, and nothing is really going to stand out. It's not going to look how I want it to. It's not going to look visually very appealing. So adding in those areas of contrast is really important, I think. So right now I'm pretty happy with this. I've sculpted in a couple of layers, and you can see that I've added a little dark pocket in here, so maybe there's a little recession inside of that grassy area. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a very tiny touch of white, because white can be a pretty powerful color. I'm going to add in a little bit more yellow. So I'm going to really brighten this up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to scrape off the edges of my brush so that there's very little paint on the actual brush itself. And at the very tips, I'm going to add in a couple of effects. And what I'm doing there is I'm just basically pushing straight in and then lifting up very gently. Not doing very much there. It's kind of a knacky thing. But basically I'm just pushing in and then pulling up sharply. Sharply but gently, if that makes sense. I just dropped a little drop of paint on the floor. Oh well. And basically what I'm doing is I'm just adding these very bright areas where there are a couple of very small little strokes of the brush. And basically what that's doing is it's giving the illusion of little blades of grass that you can see that are really catching the sunlight. And again, I'm not placing them all over the place. I'm trying to sculpt it. So I'm thinking about, okay, how does the land flow? I kind of want a hilly area that kind of comes up again. So I need to sculpt in these pieces and make sure that where I'm putting these highlights makes sense with the effect that I'm trying to achieve. And again, I don't want to completely destroy all of my dark areas by putting in too many light areas. So I think I'm going to call it right about here, I think I'm pretty satisfied with the way things look right now. Let me just dab this up so I don't drip in more. Okay, so we got our grass on there. Now we're going to want to start to think about some trees. And I'll put in a couple of little trees here that maybe we'll have a good mix between some evergreens and some like deciduous trees. So leafy guys. All right. So when I'm thinking about that, what I want to do is kind of lay in my base constructions for those things. And that sounds pretty weird and pretty out there, and like it might be difficult, but what I'm really thinking is just what are the bare bones of this tree? And I'm going to kind of etch it in with a lot of my dark color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into brown and black. So this is quite dark at this point, but that's the way that I want it. And I'm still using the fan brush because I think that really makes doing, especially evergreen trees, I really think that makes it nice, makes it easy, that's for sure. So what I'll do is I'll go into the black and the brown, make sure that my brush is loaded up, and I'm going to take the fan brush and put it vertically so that string of bristles is going perpendicular with the floor. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop in the start of an evergreen tree. So that's going to be my sort of tree topper. That's where the star goes on the Christmas tree. And I'm going to take the corner of the brush, and as I go down, I'm going to add in a couple of random little branches to come off. And as I go down, I'm going to taper further and further outward. This is quite dark at this point. And again, I'm trying to put in that level of darkness so that I can, at the end of it, go in and put in my highlights and really make that thing shine. I'm just going to put in quite a bit more dark at the bottom. So the paint below it is actually still liquid. It hasn't dried yet. So as I was going down, not only was I losing paint in the brush, but it was also starting to mix with the paint at the bottom, and it was starting to look a little bit muddled and mixed, which isn't really what I'm going for at this point. So there's an evergreen. I'll put another one over here. I really like painting evergreen trees because it's pretty freeing. I think it's not too difficult, and they can really kind of be whatever you want, honestly, in a certain sense, which I think is pretty fun. Just kind of doodle with the brush back and forth. And I find putting in a little dab every now and then really helps to contribute to that look of random branches and pokey outy bits like you get on evergreen trees. And if there are any scientists in the chat, please feel free to edit me on pokey outy bits. That's probably not exactly the right terminology for that. So I'm just putting in a couple of these guys. I don't know if I mentioned this in the previous Artcast, but I really got my start in painting Warhammer 40,000 miniatures, which is, for those of you that don't know, a pretty nerdy sci-fi tabletop game where you get little figurines that you put together that represent your soldiers, and there's like a strategy game that goes with it. But the characters come completely unassembled and they come unpainted. And I really enjoyed painting those, but I found that it's really influenced my painting when it comes to landscapes, actually. Notice that what I'm doing here is I'm working from black, basically. That was something that I did on those miniatures, and the reason for it is when you're painting a three-dimensional figure, you want to give the paint some level of three-dimensionality to it as it goes onto the three-dimensional model. Which I guess makes sense if you think about it, because if you don't, all of a sudden you're going to have a very flat-looking paint job on a thing that is actually three-dimensional and actually carries different values depending on the light that you're in, and has three dimensions to it. So a lot of what I would do is I would start from black and I would slowly build up paint colors, because what I could do is I could leave the recesses, like inside of an alien's elbow or underneath somebody's neck or something like that. I could leave the darker color in there and slowly build outward on my brighter colors, so you got the darker color in the recesses automatically. It's a little bit different when you're painting a landscape like this, but I found that it works for me for whatever reason. So I've got a couple of evergreen trees. I'll put in a couple of deciduous trees. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm just going to come straight down like this. Now taper out towards the bottom. Get a little bit more paint because that's not looking very good. And just paint in a shape that kind of vaguely resembles a tree. Fill in that gap in between them. And I'm going to come a little bit closer to the foreground, and I'm going to do something similar. Grab a little bit more paint so that these bristles stick together a little bit better than they are now. So if you guys do have any questions or want to chat or anything, feel free to throw it up in the chat. Do my best to kind of keep an eye on that. This is a bigger tree, it's a little bit closer to us. I'm purposefully not going into a lot of detail at this point. One, because I don't really have the brush for it, and two, what I'm trying to do is just basically rough in the shape. I don't want to get too particular at this point. And just like that, I think we're good, honestly, at that point. I'm pretty happy with the amount of trees that we have at this point. And there will be more coming as we come closer to the camera. So at this point, what I think I'm actually going to do is I'm going to start turning my attention to stuff that's closer. I want to give this stuff a little bit of a chance to dry, and I'm going to instead work closer and then come back, if that makes sense. So I will rinse off my brush here. And I will get in another larger brush. Let's use this one. And I'm again going to go into a darker color. I want the darker, how we kind of did a mid-tone here. I'm going to want something that's even darker because I want even bigger contrasts when I get closer. So the closer you get, the more detail you get, the more vibrant things are. And I really want to have that come across properly in this. So I'm going to take this brush, and this is just a flat brush from Royal and Langnickel. So I'm going to go in darker color here, black and brown. And I'm going to want something that's going to kind of come right at the edge here. Again, I was kind of looking for that misty effect in between. So we're going to go for something that's similar here. Probably start off a little bit higher and then come down. All right, I think we got the feedback. Sorry, my apologies for all the technical glitches. It is weird, not exactly sure what's causing that. But I'm going to come in here and I'm going to fill in everything. Just going to fill in all this area over here. And I'm going to want a sharper edge here, because eventually what that's going to be is a little waterfall, I think. And we'll come in here, grab in a little bit of this black and brown color again. And we're going to come across on the opposite side. Get a little bit more of that darker color. And I'm going to pay attention to kind of paint these edges as well. So I'm thinking is I'll end up having sort of this this river that's going to kind of come back and wander and then kind of crash down over the edge here. That's what I'm thinking at this point. Similar in composition to the one that I did previously. I didn't even really think about that before I actually started putting paint to canvas. But it's true, nonetheless. And what I'm going to do here is I know that this is eventually going to be water down here. So what I'm going to want to do is add in a little bit of the basis for reflection. So I'm just going to start pulling this dark color down, because eventually this is going to be covered in blue. And I want to be able to have sort of a look like this rock goes down into the water. It's not just resting above the water, somehow floating above it like that, but it's actually plunging down and water is filling in around those rocky areas. So So at this point, before I go any further, I'm going to kind of have that waterway come in right through there and drain down. So I think I'll just put in a flat layer of blue at this point. I know that we're getting a little bit low on time. It looks like it's 7:50 now. So I'll just do that, and then I think we'll call it good for tonight at least. So I'm going to go into that blue. That blue is actually starting to dry on the canvas. So I'm going to grab a little bit more. I thank you guys again so much for joining me. This is it's cool to be able to paint with people live, and then to be able to kind of follow up on things. It makes it quite fun, I think, to be able to do that. This shade of blue is a little bit transparent, so I might take a coat or two to cover up this area back here. It wasn't something that I considered, but now that it's going down, I'm actually seeing that that is the way that it is. It is a little bit of a transparent blue paint. It's no matter, it's just something to consider and keep in mind as you go. Whenever you make a mistake while you're painting, you just buy some white gesso, which is like a thick acrylic primer that goes on the canvas. It's what you get on all pre-stretched canvases that you might find at Hobby Lobby or Michael's or anything like that. And you just cover over everything. You just go for it. It's all good. Don't have to worry about anything. I'm actually going to go up and cover over these, that little piece that I dropped down into the water before. And you can see what's happening is it's darkening that area around the edge. And what I'm going to do eventually is I'm going to come in and put in a sharp edge that's above this sort of faded edge down below. And it's going to look like a water line kind of cuts across the rock. And there's a little bit of rock that's actually submerged within the water. So it creates a really nice, nice type of effect. And the fact that this brown paint is still a little bit wet is actually aiding me in that process. I actually do want it to meld together a little bit and be able to mix a little bit. So depending on what happens here, this is going to be a little bit interesting. Putting this paint over the top. The coverage isn't so bad. So I just basically want this to look like a little stream that's kind of meandering through. With a little bit more paint, it's covering nicely. So that's the good news. And I know that it doesn't really look like a whole lot right now. It looks a little weird, maybe like this weird blue snake that's kind of going off into the wilderness. But eventually we'll clean everything up and bring everything together. So next time what we'll be doing is putting some highlights on these trees, making these into actual sort of bluff type thing, little rocky areas, and just basically finishing up, refining, like all of the skeleton, so to speak, is there right now. We just need to kind of refine and put some meat on the bone, so to speak. So I'll just finish up a couple of last minute details with the paint that I still have on the palette right now. But I thank you for joining me. Appreciate it very much. Like I said, it's very fun to be able to paint with people and kind of go along and have you guys out there watching. And if you guys haven't followed on Facebook or Instagram, I'd invite you to do that because I post a lot of different pieces of artwork that I've done. And you kind of see a little bit of the process in that too. I try to post images in progress as well as the finished piece. So if you guys wouldn't mind giving me a follow, JStan Studios on both Facebook and Instagram. I think you'll enjoy the stuff that I post there. I hope so, at least. Right now, I'm just dabbing along the edges to make sure that everything is covered along those. quickly finish up. And I did want to provide an update for people who might be watching that are interested in Champions of Breakfast. Champions of Breakfast is a comic book that I've been creating. It follows a couple of anthropomorphic breakfast characters in sort of like a fantasy type universe as they solve crimes and basically fight evil. And basically, the comic book is something that I really hope that parents and kids can enjoy together, is kind of the way that I was writing it. That there's a little bit of something for everybody in there. And it's just a fun story about, knights and wizards and stuff like that. So that'll again be going up there. I'm in the middle of issue 2 right now. I just started inking page 7, actually right before we went live here today. So that's out there, and I invite you to join that and take a peek. So until next time, we'll come back and refine this and finish it up. But until next time, I hope you enjoyed, and God bless, guys. Thanks for joining.